Right now, getting to almost anywhere on Earth is a scheduling problem, not a survival problem. Book a flight, sit down, show up somewhere else in hours. It wasn't always like that. For the overwhelming majority of the time humans have existed, there was exactly one way to get anywhere. Put one foot in front of the other and hope you survived long enough to arrive. No roads, no maps of what was ahead, no guarantee the next valley had water or didn't have something that wanted to eat you, and yet, over hundreds of thousands of years on foot, humans eventually reached almost every corner of the planet. That single limitation, walking speed and nothing faster, quietly shaped almost everything else about early human life, where you could live, what you could carry, who you'd ever meet. This is the actual story of how humans broke out of that limitation, piece by piece, over tens of thousands of years. Here's the part that surprises people. Humans are genuinely bad at short bursts of speed. A cheetah blows past 60 miles an hour. A horse can hold 25 to 30 for miles. You, at a dead sprint, might touch 15 for a few seconds before you're wrecked. But speed was never the actual advantage. Endurance was. Your feet have natural spring built into the arch. Your Achilles tendon stores energy with every step and gives some of it back. A ligament running along the back of your neck keeps your head steady while the rest of you is in motion. And you're covered in millions of sweat glands, a cooling system most large animals simply don't have. You weren't built to outrun anything. You were built to simply never stop. In 1978, a research team led by Mary Leakey found something extraordinary in Tanzania, a trail of footprints pressed into hardened volcanic ash left by two individuals walking upright side by side. Those footprints are roughly 3.6 million years old. For a staggering stretch of time after that, just walking was the entire transportation system available to our ancestors, and somehow it was enough to eventually put people on every continent except Antarctica. Starting somewhere around 70,000 years ago, groups of humans began moving out of Africa, not as one dramatic journey, as thousands of small generational pushes, each group going a little further than the last into land nobody in their family had ever seen. And this wasn't blind wandering. Archaeologists have found materials like obsidian and shells turning up hundreds of miles from where they naturally occur, meaning people weren't just stumbling forward. They were deliberately traveling, trading, and staying connected with other groups across serious distances, on foot, with nothing but the trip itself as the technology. Walking has one obvious weakness. It stops completely at the edge of water, and water was everywhere, about cutting through migration routes, hunting grounds, trade paths. For most of human history, a river or a strait wasn't just inconvenient, it was a wall. The Flores discovery breaks that pattern earlier than almost anyone expected. Wood and reeds don't survive hundreds of thousands of years, so whatever they floated on is long gone, but the tools on the other side of the water prove the crossing happened. The earliest boats were probably barely boats at all. A log that happened to float, a bundle of reeds lashed together, not engineered, discovered, probably by accident, by someone who grabbed onto something floating and didn't drown. What happened later wasn't an accident anymore. Roughly 65,000 years ago, humans reached Australia, a crossing that required at minimum several dozen miles of open ocean, with no land visible on the other side to aim for. Nobody drifts there by chance. Someone built something that could float, pointed it at open water they couldn't see across, and paddled anyway. The most extreme version of this came much later, and it's honestly one of the most impressive feats in human history. Starting roughly 3,000 years ago, Polynesian voyagers began deliberately settling the Pacific, the single largest body of water on the planet. They built double-hulled canoes, loaded them with food, animals, entire families, and sailed distances that sometimes stretched past 2,000 miles of open water, navigating with no instruments at all. They read the direction of ocean swells, the position of stars, the flight patterns of birds, even subtle color changes in the clouds that hinted land was near. That system was precise enough to deliberately reach Hawaii, Rapa Nui, Aotearoa, now called New Zealand, nearly every habitable island scattered across the Pacific, found on purpose, not by accident. Walking solved distance, boats solved water, but there was still a problem nobody had cracked. Wait, you can walk 20 miles in a day. You cannot walk 20 miles carrying an animal that weighs more than you do. For most of human history, the real limit on transportation wasn't how far you could go. It was how much you could physically carry while doing it. So people started cheating that limit. First, by dragging loads on hides across the ground. Later, with something smarter, a simple frame of two poles lashed into a V shape called a travois, with the load spread across a platform between them, one person dragging far more weight than they could ever carry on their back. The real breakthrough wasn't a tool, though. It was a partnership, somewhere between roughly 15 and 40,000 years ago. The exact window is still debated. Humans domesticated dogs, the very first animal we ever partnered with. In colder regions, dogs pulled sleds across ice and snow, hauling weight no single person could manage alone. But dogs are only so big, something larger was still missing. Around 5,500 years ago, in the grasslands of what's now Kazakhstan, humans figured out the horse. We know this partly from wear patterns on horse teeth, consistent with a bit being used to guide them, and from residue found in ancient pottery consistent with mare's milk. These weren't just people who hunted horses anymore. They were living alongside them. And the horse changed the entire scale of human movement. For roughly 300,000 years, the fastest a human could reliably travel was walking speed. On a horse, that number jumped dramatically. In a single generation, distances that used to take weeks could be crossed in days. Here's the part that genuinely doesn't add up until you sit with it. Humans crossed oceans before anyone invented the wheel. The oldest wheel we found, from the Ljubljana marshes in Slovenia, is only around 5,000 years old. Boats predated by thousands of years. Horses were already being ridden before it existed. The wheel wasn't humanity's first major transportation breakthrough. It was one of the last. And it didn't even start as a transportation idea. The earliest wheels were used for shaping pottery, a spinning disc for clay. At some point, somebody looked at that spinning disc sideways and had a very different thought. What if you put something on top of it instead? So here's the actual shape of the whole story. For most of human history, there was exactly one way to travel, your own two legs. Then people learned to float. Then they learned to drag more than they could carry. Then they partnered with animals who could carry more than they ever could alone. Then, almost as an afterthought, they figured out the wheel. Every single one of those breakthroughs took thousands of years, and everyone was built directly on top of the last. You can cross an ocean in 6 hours now and get annoyed about the Wi-Fi. Someone's ancestors walked barefoot across an entire continent they had no name for, toward a place they had no way of knowing existed. If you want more stories about the ordinary problems that quietly built the world you live in now, the rest are on the channel.